It's been a while since I did any home brewing, and I've had a few suggestions actually from people to make mead or to make dandelion wine. And actually what I think I'm going to do today is collide those two ideas. And so we're going to make mead, which is technically called metheglin, which is honey wine flavoured with herbs, in this case dandelions. So I've got my demijohn sterilising here, and I'll sterilise the airlock in a moment. While that's happening, I'll just tell you about the dandelion flowers. So we went out early afternoon when the dandelion flowers are fully open and picked a litre container full of dandelion flowers. Just a tiny interjection from Future Shrimp here while we're looking at pictures of flowers. I felt I wanted to let you know, in case you'd be disappointed, that this video is only the first part, up to the start of fermentation. And although I know that people do prefer to watch entire videos with the whole story in them, there is a reason for this, and it's that dandelions are very seasonal. So if you want to go out and make anything with dandelions right now, there are some links in the video description to dandelion fritters as well, for example. Dandelions are in season right now when I'm publishing this video, and they're at their peak. And if I was to wait until this metheglin's finished, the dandelions would also be finished and you'd miss out until next year. So there will be a follow-up video which takes us from fermentation to the finished product, hopefully. I kind of worked out a little bit too late that the best way to rid the flowers of any little bugs and beetles is to tap them before picking them. Picked most of the box before doing that, so there were lots of little insects in there. The way to get rid of those is to spread the flowers out on a tray and then take handfuls of them and shake them in a loosely caged bundle in your hands. That way any little insects can be shaken off the flowers and they can escape and carry on their lives, and also then they won't taint the brew. And some of them will just crawl away anyway while the flowers are spread out like this. In terms of figuring out whether you've got rid of them all, the best way to do that is to shake the flowers all once, clear the tray, spread them out again, and just keep on repeating the process until no insects come out. And that's the best way of making sure you've got as many as you possibly can. So then I just put the dandelion flowers in a large pan and covered with about 1.5 litres of water and brought them to the boil. As soon as they boiled, I turned the heat off, put a lid on, and then left that for 24 hours. With the lid on, and because it was heated up to boiling point, it will be fairly sterile inside this pan. As long as we don't remove the lid, it will be fairly clean in there and it won't go off overnight. So today we've got to sterilise the equipment, we've got to dissolve some honey in water and flavour it with lemon and ginger as well, and then assemble it all into the demijohn, yeast in of course, and then leave it for a couple of weeks until it ferments. So let's crack on. I'm going to strain the dandelions now. For the most part, most of the vessels that we're using for straining and preparing here can be sterilised by hot water. So I've poured boiling water over all of these things here, using a little bit more rigour in the sterilising of the demijohn because a large bottle with a narrow neck is actually quite hard to clean. So if there's any scale or anything on the inside of the bottle, there could be nasties lurking there and they might take over the brew. So the demijohn gets sterilised with sterilising fluid. The rest of the equipment perfectly adequate to sterilise it by pouring boiling water over it from various directions. So that's my dandelion liquor, and it looks really pretty horrific, but don't worry. I'm just going to put a lid on that and allow that to settle, because if there's any sediment that came through, we'll try and lose it before we add the liquid to the demijohn. Now I'm going to prepare the liquid that's going to dissolve the honey. So I've got an unwaxed lemon, and the whole lemon's going to go in here, but I am going to just scrape off the zest so that we get all the flavour out of that, all the aroma out of that part of the peel. You could do this by, I suppose, just blending the whole lemon in a food processor, but I'm just going to zest it so we get the whole flavour. So we're also going to have the juice of the lemon in there, and the peel. And the acidity of the lemon here will do two things. It'll add a bit of flavour to the wine that we're making, but also yeast often likes an acidic environment, so it will help keep the yeast on top of the fermentation process and inhibit bacteria. Next, some fresh ginger. I'm going to use probably about half of this piece, so a piece about the size of my thumb. I've got weird thumbs, but the exact amount isn't all that important. I'm going to use like a finger of ginger. And I've just chopped that coarsely. You could grate it, but then it might be difficult to strain out. So we're going to bring this to the boil and then let it cool a little bit, scoop out most of those ingredients, and then add the honey while it's still warm. Now you will find on the internet lots of people saying that heating honey makes it toxic or deadly or whatever. This is not true. I'll link to a video where that's discussed in more detail. Adam Ragusa, he's really good with those sort of internet myths. Link in the description or in this card if you're on a card-enabled platform. But of course I won't be boiling the honey anyway, because we would just boil off all the aromas that are in that honey. Right, so the water and sterilising compound that was in the demijohn is going into this bowl here, where we will sterilise the airlock and the bung as well. It is possible to go a little bit overboard with sterilising. Obviously, the cleaner your equipment, the more successful your brew is likely to be. But when you consider that, you know, in days gone by, this stuff was just made in a earth hut with a straw roof, and probably people with quite dirty hands. As long as we get the yeast started, as long as we give it a really good boost with the yeast and the yeast takes hold, it will generally result in a good brew, because the yeast will overwhelm any other organisms that might be trying to grow inside the brew. But it doesn't hurt to be clean. The only danger obviously is that some of these sterilising chemicals may taint the flavour of the brew. So I am going to make sure that we've got everything out, and I'm going to rinse the demijohn with water that's been boiled and then cooled. You can't put boiling water straight into these things, they will crack. Time to add the dandelion infusion to the demijohn. Now I've transferred it into a smaller jug just to give me a chance to strain it, but also I strained it through a slightly finer sieve, but also this jug I think is a bit of a more manageable pour than the big one. In case you're thinking that looks awful, I agree. It does look really murky and looks like pond water, but it has a smell that's pleasantly like a summer meadow. Sort of grassy, slightly floral, herbal aroma. And we will stop there because there was a fair bit of sediment in the bottom of the jug. So the honey I'm going to use today is ivy honey, or at least I'm going to use 450 grams of ivy honey. This is from a friend of mine. Ivy honey is powerfully floral, and you can see how dark it is. I'm going to also use some Polish honey that I've got, because this is just really good value. I've got a bit more honey in a different jar. So for my 5 litres, I'm going to use about 1.75 kilos of honey in total. Okay, and the lemon and ginger mix, I'll strain into this jug. And I tipped off a bit of that so that we've got some space to dissolve the honey. Wow, it's really solid and crystallised, this stuff. The more honey you use in a mead mix, the stronger the alcohol content will be in the finalised mead. So I just googled a bunch of recipes really for mead, and I'm going somewhere in the middle in terms of the amount of honey that we add to the amount of total liquid. Because I don't want anything that's so powerful I can't drink it. But at the same time, I do want something that's got a little bit of a alcoholic warmth to it. And we're also going to add a load of this clear honey, this Polish honey as well. Obviously what we want to avoid here is a solid layer of honey at the bottom, because the yeast won't be able to get into that, but it'll be too sugary. So that's why we have to mix the honey with some water. I'm going to have a little taste of that right now. It's quite sweet, but it's going to be diluted with that dandelion infusion. Okay, the honey, lemon and ginger mixture has now cooled sufficiently that I can add it into the jar. We're getting kind of full up now, and I do need to leave some headspace in here in case there is any foaming or anything from the yeast. So I'm going to fill up to about probably there, And so that remaining amount there is going to be some more of this liquid mixed with the yeast and a bit more honey. I'm using a dried active wine yeast for this, and the directions are 1 level teaspoon per gallon, and this is a 1 gallon demijohn. 1 level teaspoon. Do you know what? Maybe we'll use a teaspoon measure. And there we go, there's 1 level teaspoon. So into here, I'm also going to add a bit more honey, about 2-3 teaspoons, and about a tablespoonful of white caster sugar. I'm just going to stir that together. The reason for using the white sugar is really just to give the yeast something other than the fructose in the honey to work on. I don't think it'll make a big old difference. Just going to leave that for a few minutes just to get going. What's really interesting here is the way that all of the sediments and solids in this honey and dandelion stuff have stratified and layered out. So I'm going to stir that all up so we can get everything working together again, but we'll add the yeast mixture first. I mean, just the action of pouring in the yeast mix will no doubt make a difference. And then I'm just going to stir it up with the sterilised handle of a slotted spoon. And then finally the airlock is going to go on there. And I've primed that with water from the kettle. So it shouldn't be very long before we start to see some bubbles. Now, I didn't add yeast nutrient to this at all, partly because I haven't got any, but also because I think there will be enough nutrient in all of that plant material and juice that came out of the dandelions to feed the yeast for the fermentation. That's the theory anyway. We're about 48 hours now into fermentation, and it's blipping away very nicely, bubbling every, I don't know, 20 seconds or so, which is great, which means fermentation is going on in the jar. And this is where we leave it for now. So this will probably take a couple of weeks to ferment, and then I'll have to rack it off to get rid of the sediment and let it settle and clarify. So there will be a follow-up video to this one where we'll look at all of that process. But I wanted to put this video up there now so that if you want to go out and make something with dandelions, which are fantastic right now, you'd be able to do it while they're still in season. If you're watching this later after that video has been published, there will of course be links in the video description to part 2 of this video series. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.